On today's show, the All-Star break is over for the Atlanta Hawks, and they, unfortunately for Hawks fans, suffered a third consecutive loss on this Friday, falling at home to the Toronto Raptors. We'll get into all of what transpired in what became this narrow loss, why it unfolded that way, some challenges, some positives, and much more. We'll get into all of that right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1659 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Friday evening here in late February. And I want to encourage you, as I always do at the top of the podcast, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks, and check us out and subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcasts. I will give you a programming note at the top of the show that if you are watching us on YouTube, I appreciate you finding the show on that platform. Basically, the Locked On Podcast Network is going over some changes over the weekend when it comes to the audio hosting platforms. I wouldn't even fill you in on that, except for the fact that I don't have access to the audio feeds until Monday. So if you're listening to this podcast on Monday, that's why I dropped in your feed a little bit later than usual. But I'm recording this podcast on Friday evening, and hopefully you are watching us on YouTube in real time. It's been very busy on the show, by the way. Before I dive into today's game, I did 4 episodes in the last week. 2 with Tyler Jones, good friend of the podcast, 2 with Ben Ladner, also a friend of the show, talking all things Hawks and Eastern Conference, and those are still very relevant conversations even now. But with all that said, we'll dive in, for the most part, on today's episode to what became a narrow loss for the Hawks, 123-121 at home tonight against the Toronto Raptors. It was kind of an on-brand performance in some ways for the Hawks. We'll get into all of kind of how that speaks to that. But a third straight loss for the Hawks. They were actually favored in all 3 games. You don't want to lose 3 games in a row no matter what, but you especially don't want to lose 3 games in a row that you are quote-unquote supposed to win. They were 7-point favorites tonight, according to our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. And by the way, they've also now split the series with Toronto this year, 2-2. It was kind of a rest versus rust situation for the Hawks and the Raptors in this game. On one hand, Toronto was playing on the second night of a back-to-back with travel, so a tough spot on paper for the Raptors. But the Hawks hadn't played in 9 days, whereas the Raptors played last night. So there's kind of that back and forth there. And at the outset of this game, you might point to that as a potential advantage for Toronto, who started this game very well, and the Hawks did not. Once the Hawks woke up, they were the better team, but they were already down by double digits, and that kind of cost them big picture. So there's a lot to get to on this particular evening. If you are a new listener, what we do on the show is kind of go a little bit broad at the top of the podcast, talking about kind of my takeaways, offense, defense, where the Hawks struggled. In the middle of the podcast, we'll talk kind of about the ins and outs of the game, some more granular observations and runs and all that stuff throughout the game. And at the end of the show, we'll talk about the individual player breakdowns. Everyone who took the floor for the Hawks will get a little bit of a segment from me at the end of the show, and then we'll kind of look ahead to what is to come. But first, we'll kind of go broad here about the, I will say this. The sexier side of the floor is offense, of course, for this Hawks team. It's their better side of the floor. It was also a true roller coaster in this game for Atlanta, highs and lows on offense. But I will save that and start with the defense, as I sometimes do on the show. So the Hawks had a 122 defensive rating in this game. That is not cataclysmic by any means, but it's not very good. The Raptors are below average offensively this season, about a 114 or so offensive rating for the year. So that's obviously well below what they were able to do tonight. They did shoot the ball well in this game. The Raptors were 15 of 39 from 3, about 39%. They had some tough ones for sure. They got a lot of valuable shots off the bench from Grady Dick and also from Ochai Agbaji. So a little bit of, unevenness there, but nothing outrageous. Like, they were hot early in the game. They were hot at times in the second half of this game, but on the whole, there wasn't like a crazy outlier shooting number from the Raptors in this game. Now, they shot 40% from the field in this game. That's not crazy outrageous either, but the Hawks on the bright side only allowed 8 free throw attempts in the entire game. So they didn't really foul at all. And also half of those were on technical fouls for the Hawks. But they did allow 37 assists. That's a super high number. And only caused 12 turnovers in the game. Also allowed 60 points in the paint and 22 fast break points. Post-game, Quin Snyder, who was also, by the way, who was ejected in this game. We'll collect that later on in the show. He talked about this too, but the transition defense for the Hawks was quite bad in this game. Our friends at Cleaning the Glass, who do a great job pulling stats, had the Raptors in the 92nd percentile when it comes to frequency of getting out in transition in this game. And the Hawks also gave up so many easy back cuts and even front cuts, all kinds of cuts for easy buckets in this game. Let's just say around the rim, and some of that's to be expected. I'll get into this a little bit more with detail later on, but essentially in this game, the Hawks, when they were going small, and I understood why they went small in this game, they had a starting center who's obviously limited by minutes and was not playing well in the first half of this game. Their quality backup center, who's also kind of a starting level center, is also out in this game, in Okongwu. And the Hawks had to kind of go small with Jalen Johnson, and that helped their offense quite a bit. When they played small in this game without a center on the floor, they couldn't get stops. And that isn't a huge surprise. It's kind of what you expect when you go small is good offense and bad defense, and that was definitely magnified in this one. But it was very familiar, let's just say, big picture for the season, where the Hawks were pretty good offensively on the whole, but they were just a little bit worse than that defensively, and they lost a close game. And that was kind of the theme of the first quote-unquote half of the season. That's why the Hawks right now are 24-32, is that their defense has been really bad all year long. That was certainly the case in this game. 8 guys in double figures for the Raptors in this game. No one went crazy. Emmanuel quickly had a great first half for Toronto. He was very good in this game. I mentioned before Grady Dick, Ochai Agbaji, but when you allow a lot of guys, essentially everyone except for Jordan Nwora on the Raptors roster had a positive offensive game, and that's going to be tough to overcome. And we'll kind of leave it there for now. But defensively, a lot to be desired. It was very familiar to the rest of the season. Offensively, a lot to get to here. So they had reasonable offensive efficiency in this game on the whole. They scored about 1.2 points per possession in this game. And usually for a lot of teams, that's enough to win games. That's about what the Hawks average on the year, something like that. And honestly, if you want to go positive first, they actually won the possession battle by a lot in this game. They took a lot more shots than the Raptors did from the field. They had 29 second chance points, did the Hawks. They got a ton of offensive rebounds in this game, and they made the most of them for the most part in this contest. That's a ton, by the way. Only 9 turnovers. That's a really good number. They also took 16 more free throws than the Raptors did. So only those 3 numbers: second chance points, turnover margin, free throw attempts. The Hawks dominated it. Not just one, dominated those categories. And the reason the game was close was because of that. But the rest of the game, when it comes to the shooting splits, which is obviously the most important of the factors in play on offense and defense, it's just the way that you shoot and your opponent shoots, they were bad in that area. So we'll talk about the bad start again later on in the podcast, but the Hawks missed 12 straight shots in the first quarter, and they were behind the 8 ball the rest of the night as a result of that. But they finished with not ridiculous shooting numbers, 43% from the field and 31% from 3 in the game, but they were 4 of 19 from 3 after halftime, and that was actually better than they were for most of the second half. They were at 1.2 of their first 15 from 3 in the second half, and they made one that was kind of inconsequential at the very, very buzzer of the second half to get it to 4 of 19. So they were actually 3 of 18 in the competitive portion of the second half from 3. They even missed free throws. They missed 7 free throws, which isn't crazy either, but they shot 71% from the free throw line in the game. They're actually 81% for the year. So they were below average in that area, where you can't blame anybody on that other than yourselves. Only 3 or 4 guys had decent or better offensive games for the Hawks in this game. DeJounte Murray had 24 points on 18 shots to lead the team. He was pretty solid on offense in this one. Hunter had 22 points on decent efficiency. He was solid as well. Other than that, Bay and Johnson were okay. They both had some nice flashes. Johnson getting to the rim as a penetrator. Bay hit 4 threes, but struggled inside the arc in this game. They weren't awful. Everybody else was not very good offensively. So, for one, Clint Capela hurt them a lot in the first quarter. I think it gets overstated that he was the only problem, but he was very, very bad in the first quarter. His first stint in 20 days, he hadn't played in 20 days. He was really awful at the start of this game. That hurt them. And then Trae Young had what I would think is probably, if it wasn't his worst offensive game of the year, it was certainly on the list. It was his season low in scoring with 11 points. And again, he hit a 3 basically at the buzzer. So he had 8 points to the last 1 second of the game. And that's not something it's not all about scoring for Trae, but he also had 7 assists. That's not a huge number for him at all either. He was just not good offensively in this contest. And Bogey was also really bad. So combined, Trae and Bogey, so 2 of their 3 initiator scorer types on the perimeter other than DeJounte Murray. Trae and Bogey are arguably 2 of their 3 or 4 best offensive players, right? Trae number 1, and then where do you want to put Bogey in there? They combined to shoot 9 of 30 from the field and 5 of 17 from 3. And again, that included the heave by Trae at the end. So before that, it was 8 of 29 from the field and 4 of 16 from 3. It's going to be hard for the Hawks to score at a high level when they do that. And even then, it's crazy to say, because they won all of the margins, they actually were able to overcome a lot of the poor shooting by a lot of guys in this game. If you remove Sadiq Bey, who was 4 of 7, nobody else was good from 3 in this game. And the Hawks still were in this game because they have more talent than the Raptors, and they also just won on the margins, but it just was so bad offensively when it came to actual shot making. So as far as like which side of the floor to blame, it was definitely a two-way issue in this one. They weren't their absolute worst defensively. They weren't their absolute worst offensively. But a home game where you're favored by 7 points against a team that was missing a player in RJ Barrett, yes. The Hawks are missing, obviously, a key guy in Okongwu as well. But you're supposed to win this game. You have the rest advantage. You're at home. Your fresh legs, obviously, maybe some rust. That will certainly that's not an unreasonable thing to point out, especially when it comes to the first quarter of this game. But you got to win this one, and the Hawks were right there again in the fourth quarter. They were in the game. They got it. They actually took the lead a couple times in the second half of this contest, but another close game, another loss for the Hawks, and again 24-32 on the season, and 3 straight losses for Atlanta as they enter the stretch run of the campaign. All right, we'll have more on this game when it comes up in a second, when it comes to the game flow in this one, my observations throughout the contest, and then, of course, at the end of the podcast, some player breakdowns. But first, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Stitch Fix. With Stitch Fix, you get a stylist who understands your style, size, and budget, and they do all the shopping for you. That makes it the easiest way to update your wardrobe this season. With Stitch Fix, I give my stylist my size, style, and budget preferences, and then I order boxes when I want to and how I want to with no subscription required. And they send me 5 just for me pieces, plus recommendations for my outfits and pro styling advice. Keep what works. I actually send back all of the rest. My stylist also sends the right stuff that I'm looking for, and the fit is always on point. And with Stitch Fix, they also make it very, very easy for you. I really don't like to shop at all. They save that time and effort for me, which I appreciate. And then I get the outfits that I actually like, and they make me look good and feel good. And also, if you don't love something else, you can just send it back. Shipping, returns, and exchanges are always free with Stitch Fix, and they give you style that makes you feel as good as you look. You can get started today at stitchfix.com/lockedon. That is stitchfix.com/lockedon. One more time, stitchfix.com/lockedon. Okay, we'll dive in now to kind of how this game unfolded, but first, some injury updates for Atlanta. And the big one actually came down on Thursday, and that Quin Snyder, at the team's first practice post-break, said that Onyeka Okongwu was going to be out for, quote, the foreseeable future, end quote. Since then, there's really been no update from the Hawks. He's listed as out, obviously, with the toe injury. We already knew about the toe injury. He actually had that suffered in the final game against Charlotte before the break. But that's a little bit ominous, of course, from Snyder. It does not mean anything specifically because, coaches don't always have the most reliable injury updates. Also, that's just a very vague term. And I heard the Hawks might actually issue a statement or of some sort today, and they never did that. So I'm not sure what's going on as far as the timeline is concerned. Maybe we'll hear something more on Saturday or Sunday. But obviously, that's not great. It's a toe injury. If it's broken, it could be a while. It could be soon. He was also seen in a walking boot, both at practice and shoot around, and also at the game. Today he's on the bench for the Hawks, so that's a big loss. Obviously, Okongwu's not like their best player, but certainly they're not the same team without him. He's been playing really good basketball in recent days, so that's one to keep an eye on for sure. And when I have more information, I will give it to you. Also, on Friday, the Hawks assigned Kobe Buffkin, rookie first-round pick, to College Park. I don't love that, obviously. I think, and I've said this before, but I think he should be basically the 9th man right now and played every game, 10, 14 minutes, something like that. They also could have sent him to Indiana with College Park on Thursday, and they didn't do that. AJ Griffin played with College Park on Thursday on the road, and rather than sending Buffkin to do that, they didn't do that, which is a little bit curious to me. I do think, big picture, if the Hawks had just decided for whatever reason that they don't want to play Kobe right now in Atlanta, he's better off playing College Park. If that's a big if, that they just decided he's not going to play in Atlanta, I'm okay with him playing College Park. They have a road game on Saturday. We'll see, but that was, of course, met with a lot of resistance by Hawks fans. I don't really blame you for that. But if the choices are, no playing time in Atlanta or a lot in College Park, then I think College Park's the right answer. But if it was me, I haven't played in Atlanta. That's just me. And the Capela came back, obviously, today. That was the only thing. He actually was limited in minutes. He played 19 in this game. I was surprised. No, I shouldn't say surprised. I thought it was notable that they started him. I wasn't sure what I was planning on, but certainly wasn't expecting him necessarily to definitely start with his limits, with his minutes restricted that he actually had. He, again, had a bad start in this game. It was better in the second half for sure. I think they probably wanted to have him play against Pirtle, which is my best guess. Pirtle's kind of their only center for Toronto, so that was probably why that was. But anyway, that led to a lot of small ball and some Bruno Fernando along the way. Anyway, to the actual game now, and as I mentioned before, a 15-2 start for the Raptors in this game. Ironically, Capela actually made the first bucket of the game for the Hawks on the first possession. A cutting layup, he was fouled with the pass, finished it, and then the Hawks didn't score for the next 5 minutes. They missed 12 consecutive shots. And it wasn't just one guy, 2 guys, it was everybody. 3 misses for Bay, 3 for Murray, 3 for Capela, 1 for Trae, 2 for Jalen Johnson, who also missed 2 free throws. And there you go. And also Toronto made 9 of the first 11 shots. So one team can't make a shot, the other team makes every shot, and you're down 15-2 out of the game. And from that point forward, the Hawks are the better team, but it all counts. Rotationally, they actually went to Jalen at backup 5 a lot in this game, including that was the first thing they actually did. It was Bruno Fernando coming in after that. But certainly you saw and felt, and the numbers, as I'll talk about later on the podcast, back this up. When the Hawks were playing Jalen at center, their offense, by the numbers, by the eye test, by all of it, was excellent. Unfortunately, the defense was terrible. So it was a pick your poison situation. By the way, I'll say this probably again later on, I was totally fine with the Hawks closing with Jalen at center, given the way that Capela was playing and also the fact that he was limited in this game. But the options were not great. They're obviously going to miss Okongwu, especially with Capela limited. But yeah, it was kind of a one side or the other situation a lot of the way. The first guy to get going on offense in this game was DeJounte. He had actually 8 of the first 13 points for Atlanta. And crucially, his first 4 buckets were all drives all the way to the rim. Murray is sometimes willing to pull up and set a little bit for mid-rangers. That didn't happen in this game. He actually was quite good. In fact, he was 0 4 on 3. He was 10 of 14 on 2s and was really good getting into the paint in this one. The Hawks got 4 technical fouls in this game. The first one was Trae Young's 11th of the season. By the way, this is crucial because you can only have 16. So 16 is a one game suspension for Trae. So essentially, he can get 4 more, and then the 5th one from here will be a suspension. Now the Hawks, with where they are, that wouldn't probably cripple them necessarily, but that's a lot of technical fouls. I think he's in the top 2 or 3 of the league right now, and something to monitor there. They were back within 7 briefly in the first quarter, but it was pretty hideous on the whole. They were down 11 at the end of the quarter. 1 of 9 from 3. They were 5 of 10 at the free throw line. It was rough. There was a big run. In fact, Atlanta's biggest run was an 18-4 run early in the second quarter. They actually were down by as many as 16 points before that. And then Bruno had a dunk. Matthews made a 3. Also, that was the best stretch of the entire game for Trae Young, who had 4 assists in a row at one point, and then he made a 3. And then they actually were much better from that point forward with the centers on the court, both Capela and Fernando, than they were in the first quarter. Then one of the probably bigger highlights or headlines or whatever you want to say about this game was that Quin Snyder was ejected. So Trae Young got rocked by an illegal screen, like a flat-out illegal screen by Jakob Poeltl. In fact, post-game, Laura Williams of the AJC did the pool report, and she asked about that, and the referees already kind of admitted to Lauren that they missed the call on Poeltl. It should have been a moving screen. Trae was down on the floor, and Snyder went ballistic. He got back-to-back technical fouls. He was way on the floor. He was very, very, very upset. And rightly so. That's number one. It was probably not a bad idea to defend Trae Young if you're Quin Snyder, because he's your best player. And also, as Quin would talk about later on, he was just correct that it was an awful missed call. And post-game, he talked about how it was sort of an emotional reaction, and that he did earn 1 technical foul. He actually was confused why the second one came. Obviously, we don't know what was said from where we are on the outside, but he was confused about the second one. So we'll see. Let's just pass that along. He did say that it was emotional because Trae, in part at least, because Trae was on the ground, and he was worried about Trae's knee, and obviously that's understandable. So I think it was both a I'm furious reaction and also that he was defending Trae, which I think was the right move. That led to Igor Kokoskov taking over as the head coach. He, of course, was the Suns coach at one point. Formerly, I believe, the Slovenian national team coach as well. That'll come up later because he made a mistake at the end of the game. And then Hunter got a technical foul after that. So the Hawks had 4 technical fouls in the first half. Pretty crazy. They had a good stretch. They had a good stretch at the end of the first half. Jalen Johnson had a good stretch. He got to the rim a few times. And after all that, they were down 1 at halftime because they shot really well. So the only time in the entire game the Hawks shot well was the second quarter. They had 42 points in the second quarter. They were 7 of 11 from 3 in that quarter, which means the rest of the game, they were 5 of 28. from three. They were hot. They were hot once, basically. They won the center minutes. They won the non-center minutes. They had 18 assists in the first half, and it was kind of like, all right, they're back in the game, and here we go. Then they were up by 4 points at the outset of the third quarter. It didn't last, though. They offense bogged down, 5 trips in a row of emptiness. The biggest difference in the third quarter, I thought, was Toronto making 5 threes. They were 5 of 9 from 3, and the Hawks were 1 of 6. They hung in that range for a while. They were down like 3 to 4 to 5, 6 points most of the quarter. There was a near 3 by Garrison Matthews at the end of the quarter. It was kind of waved off because it was late, and it was late. But kind of a sloggy quarter. It was 31-26. They couldn't really get shots to fall. That was kind of the theme of the entire game. I'm assuming through this a little bit to go to the fourth quarter because the Hawks defensively, again, could not really get any stops at the outset of the fourth quarter. I think 3 or 4 times in about a 2-minute span, they gave up layups on pretty easy cuts with Bruno at center and then with Jayon at center in that same span. And again, the Hawks were 1 of 12 from 3 to start the second half. Trae was banged up a little bit. He was actually had his left hand / finger taped up by the training staff in the middle of the fourth quarter. He was favoring that a little bit, and the Hawks were down by 5 with 4 minutes to go. They had it to 2 at one point. That was, it was close enough. They were within 3. With the Hawks down 5, Hunter made a 3 to get back within 2 with 3 minutes to go. And then, as Snyder kind of referenced post game as well, Kelly Olynyk hit a pretty crazy, lucky, ridiculous bank shot to put the Hawks back down by 4. That was a tough swing in favor of Toronto. They got to stop from there. The Hawks were down by 2 points. Trae had a 3 in the air for the lead in the last 2 minutes. It was a difficult shot, and Trae was not hot in this game. I didn't love that shot, I got to be honest with you. But it could have gone in. It didn't. And on the other end of the floor, Gary Trent Jr. made a 3. So it was a 6-point swing. And when the Hawks went from potentially being up by 1 to being down by 5 with about 80 seconds to go. They got the line, though. The Hawks kept scoring, to their credit. They just couldn't get stops. Like, I have written down in my notes 3 or 4 times in a row, like, all right, must stop possession. And they just didn't get that stop. Now, they finally got a stop down by 3 with 42 seconds to go. So they get a stop finally. They get a timeout with 18.3 to go, down by 3. So just to say this out loud, you're probably not, certainly you're not the favorite. Like, you're obviously a big underdog, even with the ball down 3, but you're in the game. It's one possession game. Unfortunately, the Hawks turn the ball over, and Murray's foot is ruled to be out of bounds on a handoff from Bogdanović on the sideline. Now, a lot to get to here. So I'll say this. With the replays that I have seen, and I'm sure there are more that I have not seen, but the replays that I have seen, I don't think that they would have won the challenge. But I thought it was very clearly a situation where Igor Kokoskov, again, this is Quin Snyder, who's been ejected, so this is the backup head coach, essentially. He should have challenged. I thought it was pretty obviously he should have challenged. There was no reason not to. You're down 3. If you lose possession there, you are in a situation where you're not totally dead, but you're basically dead. You don't have the ball anymore. You have to foul, and all that stuff said. The players were telling him to challenge. I don't know what the situation was where he just didn't, or like what happened there. But also, I'll throw this in there. There's a small chance, in addition to the challenge, that you might get a foul call because Murray got bumped. Like, I'm not sure that would have definitely happened. And again, what I saw in the replay was that I thought it probably would not have been overturned. But no matter what, that has to be a challenge. I'm not often this clear, and I'm not really sure what the other side is. I think it was pretty obviously a missed challenge. Think of it this way. You have a better chance, in my opinion, to win the challenge than you do if you don't challenge at all. Does that make sense? Like, you're down 3 without the ball. You have to foul, get a steal. And then after that, by the way, the game basically ends because you give a leak out dunk to the Raptors, and you don't even use a timeout then. So would they have won the game? The real answer is probably not, because you're down 3. Even if it's a challenge that you win, you're still down 3 with the ball. But it was a mistake, and one that you can kind of focus on a little bit. I don't think it was like something you need to take to your grave. But that was one that hurt them. And between the 4 technical foul free throws that Toronto made, all 4 of them, and then the non-challenge at the end, there's some margin stuff that went against the Hawks in their home floor in this one. But anyway, I'll leave it there for now. But yeah, as you can kind of see, it was basically a roller coaster. The Hawks only had 1 quarter in which they played really well on offense. In the second, And defensively, it was kind of a consistent the entire game, to the point where they just couldn't get the stops. They finally got one at the very end to set up actually have a chance down the stretch, but too little, too late. And then the controversial non-challenge at the final, basically possession of the game for the most part for Atlanta. Okay, we'll get into the player stuff in a second, but first, a word from our sponsors on the podcast. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors, and our partners at eBay Motors have been teaming up with longtime fantasy basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy basketball picks each week, all season long. Whether you're preparing for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire in your fantasy basketball league, every week we'll have some players picked out for you that are guaranteed to fit your roster from Josh. So let's see now who he has picked out for us this week on the edition of eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. And as always, there's a lot of guys to highlight in Josh's world, but we're going to focus on one of them, and that is Scoot Henderson of the Portland Trailblazers, the number 3 overall pick in this year's draft, rookie guard. And Josh indicates that he's now in line for a lot of minutes and usage for Portland for the rest of the season. Even though there are efficiency questions, which Josh certainly points out, that's kind of the vast majority of guys that are in his stead and as a rookie guard. And really, the main thing is that he needs to be rostered everywhere at this point in time. 18 points, 5 assists per game in the last 6 for Scoot. Also played 31 minutes or more in 4 straight games. The talent is very, very clear, and Josh Lloyd thinks that he is currently undervalued in the landscape of fantasy basketball, presumably because some people are looking at his season-long numbers versus his numbers in recent days, which are probably more indicative of what's going to be happening in the future for Henderson. And as always, Josh Lloyd, longtime fantasy basketball, is going to be helping you out with winning your championships. eBay Motors knows a lot about championship teams as well, and they know that it's each player has to be a perfect fit for your roster. It's the same, by the way, for your vehicle. I'm on the road a ton for work and going to Hawks games all over the place, etc. And there'll be times I actually need to upgrade it for my car, even just to find a part or two to get fixed when I need to keep things running and on schedule. And the best place to possibly do that is eBay Motors. They have over 122 million parts for your number one ride. You make sure your car truck stays running smoothly. They have brake kits and LED headlights and bumpers and roof racks. Whatever vehicle happens to need, eBay Motors is going to have it covered for you. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices at eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, and you're certainly not burning any cash. Keep your ride or die alive right now at ebaymotors.com. That is ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, and to the player stuff at the end of today's podcast on this Friday evening into Saturday. Not a lot of great stuff, I will say. As noted before, Buff getting to the G League before the game, and Okongwu is out of the lineup, so the Hawks only had essentially 11 guys active. The only ones who did not play who were active in Atlanta were Patty Mills and Wes Matthews, the 2 old head veterans. Garrison Matthews was sort of the 9th man in this game for the Hawks. 13 minutes, hit 1 3, 3 points plus 4. I thought he was fine. He didn't light the world on fire. He hit 1 big shot, and that was kind of it for Garrison, but he actually was plus 4 in the game. Bruno Fernando, 11 minutes, 12 points, 4 rebounds, all offensive. He was 5-8 from the floor, had a steal. Good energy, I thought, especially in the first half. He had 1 huge dunk that was giving a lot of juice to the building. But second half, not as good from Bruno, defensively in particular. Missed 2 free throws. I thought he was fine, but wasn't like lighting the world on fire. It is certainly helpful to have Bruno around as a third center who's actually a capable backup center. But still, the Hawks seemed to not trust him a ton in this one, at least on the coaching staff side. And, he was fine, but it wasn't like he was fantastic. Bogey had a rough one. 14 points, 5 assists, 2 steals, but was 2 of 6 on 2s and 3 of 11 on 3s. 5-17 from the floor in this one. Very inefficient defensively. Always kind of an adventure this time of year for Bogey, but he actually was plus 7 in the game, so there's that. But I thought he was pretty shaky. Hunter still off the bench, which is noteworthy to me. I wasn't expecting him to start necessarily, but I thought it was at least possible that he might start. He was asked post game. I saw Kevin Chouinard pass this along that he's basically fine with coming off the bench. Like, it's the role he's playing right now. He's trying to maximize it. But I wonder if they might go back to Hunter as a starter. We'll see. He's still probably ramping up a little bit. I think it would not be a bad idea to manage his minutes a little bit because he's obviously had the long-term knee issues. But overall, he was one of their better players, I thought, in this game. But defensively, not a good night for him. I don't think by his standards. He wasn't awful, but not his best. And he was also only 2 of 7 from 3 in the game. To the starters. So Capela had a weird one. First quarter, I mentioned before, I'll say it again, he was awful. He really was. He was absolutely out of sorts. It was one of those rare times where actually he was as bad as people were saying that he was on social media. In the game, 5.7 rebounds for Clint in 19 minutes. He hadn't played in 20 days. He was probably a little bit rusty. I'll save the full number dump because it's late in the podcast. But essentially, the Hawks' offense was very bad with Capela on the court in the game. But The Hawks defense was very good with Capela and very bad without Capela. So, and that, again, it kind of follows the eye test. If you watch the game, he obviously hurts the offense, especially when you compare him to playing small ball. It's night and day on offense. No surprise there. Defensively, though, he is a good anchor. He's not the guy he used to be defensively, but certainly he's a good organizer and all that stuff. And that was apparent in this game, especially in the second half. So I'm acknowledging now, the first quarter, he was awful. Once he came back in, he was much better. And this is crazy. It's obviously a small sample size, but these are crazy stats. I have to pass them along. In the second half, right? The Hawks had an 81.8 defensive rating with Capela on the court. That is absurdly elite, fantastic. Is that all on him? Obviously not. No one can do that on their own. But that's a great number. Now, on the other side, when Capela sat on the bench in the second half, they had a 142.9 defensive rating. They were 60 points worse per possessions defensively. So what does that mean? I don't know, but it does tell you that, for the full game, especially, but in the second half, it was an interesting parallel. So I think Capela defensively looked fine. First quarter, not very good. After that was fine. Offensively, he killed him in the first quarter, no question about that. And I like to see what he looks like after he's played a little basketball, because again, he hadn't played 3 weeks. We'll see how he looks on Sunday, but obviously the discourse is off the rails. Everyone hates Capela now. I get it, but trying to be a little bit of nuance on this podcast as always. He was not good in the first quarter, but there you go. Everybody else, Johnson and Bay, interesting, kind of put them together a little bit, but Jalen had 12 points, 12 rebounds, and 4 assists in this one. He was 6 of 11 on twos, 0 of 2 from 3, and 0 of 3 at the line, kind of strangely, in this one. 3 block shots. I thought he was pretty good. He was probably their third best, actually probably the second best player, third best player overall. Offensively, not his best, but defensively, he was probably their best defender in this game. Obviously, it's a challenge to have him play center, because it's not really his best position, but he can at least do it a little bit, and he was +7. He's the only starter in the positive for the Hawks in this game. Saddiq Bey hit 4 threes, but was actually only 2 of 8 on twos. 9 rebounds, 6 of them offensive, 18 points. Defensively, an adventure for sure. DeJounte was pretty good. Still was 0 of 4 from 3, because nobody would make a shot from 3 in this game, but he was 10 of 14 on twos. 10 rebounds, 7 assists, 24 points. He was certainly their best player in this one. And then Trae Young, I said it once before, was probably his worst game of the season. Certainly one of his 5 worst, conservatively. 2 of 7 on 2 of 7 on twos, 2 of 6 on threes. He was low usage by his standards. Only 13 shots in 35 minutes is pretty low, especially with 2 free throw attempts. He was just a non-factor at times, which was strange. 7 assists, including 4 literally in a row at one point. But he had 4 turnovers. Defensively, not his best work. So Trae was the only guy who was busy over the All-Star break. But certainly, they're gonna need more from him. No question about that. And again, not to say it again, but 9 of 30 from the field for Trae and Bogey. Untenable in a lot of ways for this Hawks team, and they were in some ways lucky to be as close as they were, given how bad they shot the ball in this contest. Okay, I've said enough on this long rambling podcast. From here, the Hawks play again on Sunday at home against Orlando. The Magic, as the Raptors did, will be arriving on the second night of a back-to-back. The Magic play on Saturday at 8 p.m. in Detroit. So a very, very tough travel situation for Orlando. We'll see if that matters on Sunday, but that's going to be happening. Also, as a PSA, I believe that game is actually at 7 p.m. Yeah, it is. 7 p.m. start at home for the Hawks and the Magic. And we'll cover that game as we always do. And then after that, Tuesday against the Jazz at home in John Collins' first game back as a member of another team. Before we get out of here, if you found us on YouTube for the first time, again, welcome aboard. We are also on the audio-only platforms like Apple and Spotify, as always, for the last 1,600 plus episodes. But again, the network is going through a hosting platform change this weekend. So this show will be on Apple and Spotify on Monday sometimes, and so will the rest of the content, including the show on Sunday. But if you want to listen or hear or watch the podcast in closer to real time, you can do that right here on YouTube if you're watching this podcast on that platform. And the best thing to do, honestly, is to subscribe and follow the show on YouTube and also on your favorite audio platforms as well. That will really help the show. Download the podcast automatically. Also helps the podcast, and ratings and reviews and all that fun stuff. Follow the show also on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there as well at BT Roll. And I also write about the Hawks on a regular basis at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Did some writing about the team yesterday, about the Trae Young situation and all that kind of stuff. So more to come on that platform. Also share some audio clips on there sometimes as well. So stay tuned for that and become a patron over there at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Thank you very much for listening to the podcast. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you after the game on Sunday between the Hawks and the Magic. 7 o'clock start, and we'll see you next time.